Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Francis. I am a contributing editor at Gamasutra.com. You may know me as the normally invisible voice inside your head when we're doing these Twitch streams, but guess what? I'm back! I'm down here in my little square. I am here today because we are getting excited and getting ready for the Virtual Reality Developers Conference. It's going to be the second standalone VRDC. It's spun off from our fine fellow folks who work at GDC. This is the part where I give the disclosure that Gamasutra, GDC, and VRDC are all sister organizations under UBM America, blah, 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 disclosure, etc., etc. I'm joined today, above me, as you see, by two other wonderful folks who are also here to talk about VR, virtual reality, and all the wonderful things happening in that world. One of them you know, Alex. Who are you?
Hi. I guess I'm that guy you know. I'm an editor at Gamasutra.com, and I am very pleased to be with you today, Brian, and our very special guest. My friend and very special guest, could you tell the audience who you are and what you do?
Hi, my name is Tom Sanocki, and I'm the CEO and founder of Limitless, a VR startup where we're making VR content creation fast and easy.
Nice. So we're also here, though, because at VRDC, you're going to be giving a talk about your VR story, experience, game. We're still figuring out like the word for some of these things, but you have an experience called Reaping Rewards, which lets players play as it seems like a Grim Reaper in training. I've seen, we were just watching some YouTube streams of it before the show. It's available on Oculus, and is it also available on Steam? I think it is, yeah?
Yes, it's available on Steam, Oculus, and Viveport.
Yeah. So if you have a VR headset, feel free to go home or to pop that up after this chat and give it a spin yourself. Tom, real quick, can you pitch us on your VRDC talk?
So in VRDC, we're going to be talking about the creative and technical developments of Reaping Rewards. In the early days of VR, technology and creative are even more tightly tied together. Game development, and they always are, but it's even more important because we're literally building the tracks and putting the train on right behind it. So we're going to talk about the creative and the artistic challenges we did building a VR experience that was designed to put you in the center of the story, give you some significant things to do in the story, and start playing with that middle ground between a film-like story and a full agency video game.
Nice. Just a quick reminder for the folks watching at home, if you have any questions for Tom about getting into VR, about what makes good VR, ask them. Ask us questions in the chat. We want to hear from you.
I have a question.
You have a question, Alex? Your hand is raised. You're asking so politely. Yeah. Go for it.
So I kind of, before we dive too deeply into this topic as a whole, I want to get a sense of how you came at it. So maybe we could talk a little bit about your background. Tom, you have previously worked at Pixar and Bungie, am I right?
Mm-hmm, yes, exactly. Long stints at both. It's very exciting.
Can we talk a little bit about what you did there and how that experience has shaped the way you approach creating things in VR?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I was a character lead at Pixar for 11 years. I came on at the beginning of pre-production, Finding Nemo, and I was there as the studio went from, making an animated film, kind of small animation studio to the big, animation powerhouse that it is today. And there I was able to work on characters on two levels. One, I was building the technology that we needed to actually make them work and make them easy. Mm-hmm. Did that in the beginning of the film. And then in the second half of the film, I would go in and eat my own dog food and actually build characters myself. So I was able to build Mater from Cars and Kevin the Bird on Up, the jellyfish on Nemo, and a handful of others. And that was an exciting experience because we were really able to see a new industry come together and see how computers and art and storytelling can all intertwine in a really rich, deep way. And create results that you couldn't do with just one of those disciplines by themselves. Then I went to Bungie and worked on Destiny as a character and cinematics tech art lead. So I was there from end of pre-production all the way through Taken King. And that was a great opportunity to take what we learned about characters and storytelling in film and apply it to a AAA video game. So there I was able to run teams that handled hard problems and characters like cloth and hair and cinematic social spaces and so forth. But more importantly, was able to learn about how interactivity, video games, and story all kind of combine together, and how you can create an amazing experience where you're the center of the story, you tell the story, and do it with friends.
So that opens up a whole Pandora's box of questions that I want to dig into. But first of all, let's focus on the interactive bits, right? So in terms of when you were working in games, and you're continuing to work in VR, how do you embody a player in an experience that feels natural and not dissonant? I think that's a real tricky thing to do, especially in VR, where you have things to worry about like height, hand color, hand shapes, places you are. How have you guys dealt with that challenge?
It's a good question, and we are just at the beginning of figuring out all those answers. So I'm going to preface everything I say with, we're probably all wrong. We think we're right
Sure.
now. We're going to figure out later that we have better ideas. But for us, we realized that our knowledge can lead us astray. That's kind of one of the first realizations we hit. We know what it's like to do X in a video game. We know what it's like to do Y in a film. It's really tempting to just do that in VR. And there's value to that, but VR is a very different medium than both of those things. So it can be very limiting to just stop there. What we try to do is to imagine an experience as if it would happen in real life. If this was actually happening to me, what would I do? What would I want to do? How would I do it? And then use that as the basis for putting everything into motion from there. So with Reaping Rewards, we thought, the setup of the story was about you're a Grim Reaper in training. So what would it be like if you actually were a Grim Reaper in training? You'd be able to look at your arms. You'd be able to see what they're like. It helps that you're inhabiting another person, because we don't have to worry about your hands matching perfectly or your skin color matching. Then we thought, okay, you're in training, so you're smaller. So we kind of make you short, and we adaptively change the height of the furniture in the room to make you feel smaller. So if you're 6 feet tall, the bed is still at the same height than it is if you're a kid and you're only 4.5 feet tall. So that gives us an opportunity to really set the stage for who you are. Then, once we figure out who you are, we think about what you do. And a Grim Reaper in training is doing just a handful of things. And we're using story to intentionally limit and constrict the things we can do. And there's two reasons for that. One is practical. It's, we don't want to let you do everything, because that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and we're not at that stage yet, at least in our development, to provide everything. The other reason we do it is it gives us an opportunity to push the technology in the cases where we feel it's ripe for the next stage, and do it in a way that's not just for that project, but something that's scalable so that other people can use it. So if we have the opportunity to work through what's touching like, what happens if you touch other characters, how do you interact with things, we keep it really constrained so we can really solve those problems well, and then use that as a jumping off point for other people as well.
Yeah, it sounds like the challenges I identified earlier are, from your perspective, actually strengths of the medium, implying insofar as that you can put somebody in a different body, in a different height setting, in a different and then you seem very convinced that helps them empathize and identify with a different experience. Has that proven true in your work?
In our experience, it has, and other people's experience will be different, and we're all learning, so we're going to come back later on and find out. But so far we found that people really embrace being someone else in VR when you present it that way. There's a lot of ways to approach VR. Are you a passive observer? Are you a ghost? Are you in the middle of the world? We think you're in the middle of the world part is particularly compelling, and it's the hardest thing to get right. So we're trying to tackle that. And if you do things right, you find the right emotional moments, and you make those interactive, that really increases a lot of that really amps the power. The story for Reaping Rewards wasn't designed by us. It was actually written years ago by our director, Matthew Ward, who his day job is Cinemax director at Bungie. So we've worked together back in the day. And he made it when he was working with Robert Zemeckis at the film studio Image Movers. And he originally, pitched it and wrote it as just a short film. You're an observer, you watch, it's regular film. But when we talked about making a VR experience, and then we came upon that idea of putting you in the middle of the story, that really made it feel emotional. It's like you're not just watching someone do hard things; you're doing it yourselves. When you touch the person's hand, to take their life, you're feeling their pulse go away. You're watching them change. You're watching, the whole scene changes. And that adds a level of emotional connection and power that you don't get in other mediums. That's the thing we're excited about. And it's just about finding the next step along the path, not just for ourselves, but for everyone else, and making that step easier.
Real quick, I just want to give a shout out to Doom Man Dog. Thank you for hosting the stream on your channel. We invite anyone watching on that channel, if there happens to be anyone out there, to ask questions for Tom. That invitation still stands. So I'm going to talk about ask a question based on my recent experience. I was playing Brass Tactics up at PAX on Oculus with the touch controllers. One of my favorite things to do in any VR experience is to sort of figure out what motions I just want to do in the game context. While I was playing Brass Tactics, I would look out the corner of my eye at my soldiers who were behind me, point at them, and then command them to go with this very dramatic gesture, this very anime look over there. When I was playing another game that was up there, whose name unfortunately escapes me, I did this thing where it was a co-op game, and we were supposed to be on this mission to rescue, or to get some stuff from somewhere, and I started just caressing his face in VR because I just reached out and how do you sort of respond to when there are good things, these things feel good to do, right? These strange, especially when you see the hand shapes move. I'll toss balls and hands back and forth when a game lets me do that. That's kind of a thinking, processing thing, or I'll toss it off. How do you respond when players, people use in your experience, want to do things that are outside that emotional spectrum you want? Because everything I just described is a little silly or a little dramatic, but because humans aren't inherently good actors, these things may still feel like it's part of the scene.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and we do a lot of user testing. We outsource a lot of testing using services like Fishbowl to get as much input as we can on what people expect to do. And for some of the things that they want to do, we'll put them into the experience. We found that a lot of people would touch the head of the patient in Reaping Rewards. You're a Grim Reaper, you're there to take their life, but some people want to comfort them. So we actually make that work. It's subtle, but it's a very subtle thing that happens, but they'll subtly calm down if you touch them. It feels like it works. Ooh. For other things, we will intentionally just not let you do it and just make it clear that that's outside of the scope of what we're doing. If you touch things like furniture, your hands just turn to smoke. So that you're not able to make a clear thing that this is not what you're supposed to do. And I think that the real power here is we have the opportunity, as developers, to constrain the experience to what we want it to be. The expectations aren't fixed yet. If I'm making an open world game on a flat screen console, I have to do X, Y, and Z, because GTA does it, because Just Cause does it, because there's expectations for what an open world game is, and this is the same with a shooter. It's the same with a Metrovania. It's same with most of the genres. But in VR right now, we can say for now you can't do these things. Make it clear to the player that you can't. Make sure that it feels consistent with the experience, and then go from there. And I think a lot of those subtle things are really important. For me personally, I lose immersion the minute I take an arrow and shoot at something and nothing happens. If I can take if it's a VR bow and arrow game and I have a companion and I shoot the companion and the arrow goes through them and they don't respond, it's it. It breaks my immersion the way it doesn't in a video game. So those little subtle things are important to get right, even if you don't do anything with it. And I think the power of early exits is a good one. If you shoot your companion can say, "Well, that's it. I'm out. I'm done," and the game ends early.
Yeah.
And then and then you can restart it and try something else, and you've taught the user a valuable lesson, which is mainly don't be antisocial.
Yeah.
I think that's the power we have right now, is we get to define the boxes. We don't have other people. Things aren't so fixed that we have to conform to existing boxes. So look at what your community does. Encourage the actions that make sense. Put in some Easter eggs, and then for everything else, find a way to tell them this isn't what you do in this experience.
Real quick, just to follow up on that, like you talk about Easter eggs, but we're talking about a game or an experience that puts the player in the shoes of death. I kind of want to know, like, are the concept of Easter eggs always appropriate depending on the themes of your work, or is there just like just give me a practical example? How did you implement an Easter egg in this project?
Yeah, well, actually, you're right. Easter egg isn't the right way to put it.
It's a good word, though.
Yeah, it's maybe a better way to put it is an unexpected thing that actually works. For example, you can try to touch the Grim Reaper, Death himself. You can, and he will respond. He kind of shakes his finger at you as to say, no, don't do this. And somewhat, trying to be a little playful with it. So it's things like that, which maybe that doesn't count as an Easter egg, but it's an unexpected thing. Or maybe it is an expected thing. In real life, if you did this, they would do something, and if you do it in this experience, it happens. And this is a little different from what our expectations are with NPCs in flat screen games. And I think that because we have touch controls and we're actually touching, that experience becomes a lot more exciting to do. People will do it more often. And then we want to encourage them positively for the things that are good, and then negatively for things that aren't.
Somewhere out there in the world is a video of our editor-in-chief, Chris Kraft, tweaking Alfred Pennyworth's mustache in the Batman PlayStation game. I encourage.
Well, but like that's such a good example, right? Because in that video, like nothing happens. Like it's funny, but it's funny because nothing happens. Whereas like I think what you're getting at, Tom, is the idea that like you make a conscious decision once you've scoped, created, and like laid out your experience to go in at the edges and fill in details that aren't core to that experience, but increase the verisimilitude of the world. I don't know.
And I think VR is that great opportunity to say, like, this is going to feel like real life. It's not going to feel like a video game. Mm-hmm. So what are our expectations for real life? Let's match and challenge those. And so if you and make it feel fun and interesting, and make it feel like have people feel a little clever if they try doing something and there's actually a response. I think that's really where we get the power of VR. That's where things start feeling real, and that's really where we get that opportunity to surpass people's expectations.
But then in this experience that you've worked on, like it's very real in some ways, but I would say like the art style, the visual style does not intend to be realistic. It's slightly abstracted. I won't say cartoony, but it's like it's not real life. So I kind of want to know, how do you walk that line between like making something feel real and like making it feel like a VR game, like an experience, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So I took inspiration from something that Ricky Nerva said. He's the production designer on Up. And Up is a film that I worked on, and it had very, very real emotions. And he intentionally put a pretty caricatured art style because for him, real emotions are counterbalanced with our cartoony art style. He doesn't want to push too much reality in both. And that was really the inspiration we did here. Let's caricature it a little bit, and that helped the emotion come out a little bit more. We also wanted to make sure it didn't feel too realistic because it'd be pretty creepy and scary. It's like, this is death. Some original model designs went far more realistic, far more creepy, like out of a horror movie. and really terrifying. And that wasn't really what the director wanted to go for. The director wanted to go for a different view of what death is. It's somebody who is, obviously serious, very, and obviously, serious about training, serious about his job, but isn't trying to make it a scary experience. It's like it's another day at the office. And yes, I happen to be killing people, but it's another day at the office. We wanted more of that feel. And if everything felt really realistic and really scary, we would put people off, and they'd be taken to a different emotional direction than we wanted them to go. And that's one of the balances always that we have with VR. And I think part of this is technical, part of it's figuring out what style works best, and there's still a lot of discovery left for us and for the other folks who are either currently VR devs or want to be VR devs. There's a lot of exciting opportunities here.
Yeah. Tom, I have some questions about death real quick, but I need to go to the chat because we have questions in chat. How did you tackle Locomotion in your VR project, and what are your views on Locomotion in VR? And do you have an exit burrito? That comes from Roman Looks, frequent Gamasutra.
Yes, exit burritos. I love exit burritos. First question with Locomotion. We tried some Locomotion early on, and it didn't work very well. We transitioned from room to room by lifting you up through the ceiling, and then we tried dropping you through the floor, kind of sinking down or lifting up. And it made people motion sick, and we threw smoke in there trying to make it better, and it wasn't great. And because it wasn't core to the experience, we ended up cutting it and doing a straight fade to black with smoke, and then fade up into a new place.
Yeah.
And then there's one other scene near the end where we do an interim teleport. And that ended up being what we needed for the project. And because the project needed it, and because teleportation and locomotion weren't key things, we didn't spend too much time really investigating it. Mm-hmm. So we don't have an exit burrito, although I love exit burritos. Just it didn't fit stylistically into this project. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I'm personally interested in is, if we can find ways to create a generic design for an exit burrito that we can fit into every experience without just putting, overlaying, a 2D UX onto things. Mm-hmm. But that's something we didn't really tackle too much because the project is pretty short, and there are not many opportunities for you to get to kind of a repeat gameplay loop. Job Simulator can very easily get you to a point where you can just keep doing fun things over and over again without a clear endpoint. The director wanted a clear endpoint that we were driving you toward, one way or the other, and so it ended up being not a big issue for us this time.
The next question comes from Doomman Dog. What are your feelings on making the best ways to express physical conflict that feel tangible when sight and sound are what the end user ingests? They've been seeking a VR game that really captures believable combat.
Believable combat. So the easiest way that I've seen to do believable combat is to do a shooter, because you get the feeling of something in your hand, that feels like a weapon, and you get the haptics from the controllers, and you get the sound and the sight. All of that can feel very, very visceral and very real. And then doubly so if you're putting enemies close to you, that, because I think that's the other power of VR. So you can get things close and have them feel close, as opposed to most action games where a lot of the combat happens when the characters are an inch high on the screen. Mm-hmm. When you think about it, it's actually not that. That's actually pretty far away. So I think that's the best way to do it. There are some folks who are focusing on hand-to-hand combat, like, for example, Gollum on the PS4 by Hardware Games. That's more of a hand-to-hand combat sort of experience, and be curious to see what folks think about that when it comes out. And other folks are doing swords, and then with Zen Blade style games. Fruit Ninja VR, but I think that is very much those kind of experiences, from what the folks I've talked to so far, are not some folks really like it and some folks don't. So I'd be curious to see just, and so what that means to me is there's still more creative work to be done in those kind of experiences to make them feel really fun and visceral. And it just means there's more work to be done, and that's great. That's exactly what we expect.
Mm-hmm.
Brian, did you want to explore your questions about death?
Yeah, I will.
That sounds heavy.
I'm going to dive right into the sort of a non-VR question about reaping rewards, which is I was watching a great video from YouTuber Lindsay Ellis about the canonical depictions of death throughout most of media history. How did you all sort of like nail this? Like, death means a lot of things for a lot of different people in a lot of different cultures. Obviously, going with the Grim Reaper, like the final Grim Reaper version looks a little like kind of standard, but still like somewhat cartoony, like kind of almost like the 1920s cartoons where it's doing the willy dance back and forth. But like, can you talk about that process going from one version to another, and how you does it ever like hit you at the end of the day when you realize like I am working to shape like a very primal force of our existence, and I'm doing that in a new field? And does that ever, like, it's a cheesy question to say, does that ever blow your mind, but does that ever give you pause about the bigger picture of what you're doing?
I have to say I never really thought that we'd be defining, death in a new medium. So now I'm going to be thinking about it every night, and I'm going to be freaking out about it. So Thank you for creating stress, anxiety, and nightmares in my life. Because I honestly never did think about that. We've been just very practically focused on like, what should this be, and not thinking about the bigger implications of it.
Yeah.
So that is really interesting. The way we've been looking at it is we didn't want to go, the director didn't want it to feel like super realistic. So they didn't want to freak people out, especially in VR. Like, it's so easy to scare people in VR. Like, that was not the goal. He didn't want to make it super cartoony either. Like, it felt like, something that was a little bit not serious enough. So the art director, Darren Bacon, threw out a couple of early sketches that just really resonated with the director, that were, pretty similar to what we ended up here. We just ended up making the shoulders, his designs had the shoulders really squared off and really broad. So the shape was very, very rectangular. Mm-hmm. And that really spoke to Matt because it felt imposing without being scary. Mm-hmm. And those designs helped shape the character of it. And Matt, of course, could speak to this more specifically than I could. But just in our conversations, he's talked about how imposing was more of the feeling he wanted, imposing and serious, not scary, and I'm going to eat your soul. Mm-hmm. So that's really where it ended up. And Matt has a long experience in animation as well, and so an animation style kind of felt natural to him. Mm-hmm. And that made it easier for us to kind of get that middle ground where if the design felt like it wasn't scary and it wasn't too much on the cartoony side. And then the rest of it's the acting, the performance, and the kind of how you structure the experience.
We can talk about acting and performance next because you all didn't just make this VR short. You also made a tool for others to animate and create performances for animated characters in virtual reality. I think it's called like the Immersive Platform, I think. Is that the name of it?
Yeah, the VR Creative Environment.
VR Creative Environment, yeah. Could you talk about developing that platform alongside your game itself and how you think VR developers should be thinking about like this kind of dual business of making tools and making content?
Yeah, no, we definitely saw early on that we have to build a lot of the tracks mm-hmm. before for the video game and VR experience train to run on. And we take a lot of inspiration from the early days of Epic Games and early days of Pixar, mm-hmm. where you're actually building that technology infrastructure at the same time. In the early days, the short films that Pixar made, excuse me, pardon me.
Bless you.
The short films that Pixar made were actually designed as promotional experiences for their their Pixar image computer. They were selling hardware, rendering hardware, and then using little short films to show what it can do. Something that's bigger than a tech demo. And Epic Games, made a game engine, and started selling it, on the end of Gears of War. So that feels like a really good place to be right now in VR, because there's so much to build, so many new things. And what better way to prove the thing works to yourself as well to others than by building a short experience with it? So that's been our model since the beginning, with Gary the Go last year and now Reap Rewards here. And the thing that we really believe that's time consuming yet really important in VR is making the scene assembly and the animation and the interactivity easier, because so much of it is complicated and tricky. And so we worked hard to, with Reaping Awards as our guinea pig, to see how quickly could we get an experience up on its feet in a rough form. How can we get some interactivity, authored early, not late, but early, so that you can start playing, with like, does this experience feel good if I have these choices? Let's go in and make a system where you can do some animation straight in VR, so that you don't have to go back and forth between Maya and export to Unity or Unreal and then get it into VR headset. Let's just do it right there. So we're really excited to be able to build that, because it helped us, and then it can help others. Because it's not just about going fast, although that's important. It's about trying out more ideas. If it takes you a long time to try out new ideas, and your budget has to be small, because VR, the market's small, so you have to keep your budget small, you don't want to spend a lot of time trying a new idea out. If it's taking you a lot of time, you're going to go with your first or second idea, which is going to be a port from games or film, something you already know. So that's fine, but that's not going to create like innovative, amazing experiences that are tuned to VR. It's going to create something that feels like X in VR. But if we have the opportunity to say, let's try 10 ideas out in a day, let's try 20 ideas out in a day, let's see if I can get an experience up on its feet in 6 or 10 minutes with interactivity, with animation, with everything. Now that changes the game entirely. And if you can do it when it's really easy, because you're using motion controls to just directly touch and move things around, now you can get people involved who aren't 3D graphics professionals. You can get your writer involved and have them try out some ideas. And we, in our talk, we're going to go through some details of how some pretty key artistic decisions were made by being able to try out different ideas in VR and then test them. And how some ideas that ended up really working were the ones that we discounted at the beginning. Like we thought about the beginning, we had like 5 ideas we're going to try. We took one of them and said, no, that will clearly never work. We won't even try it. And then we went through ideas 1 through 4 and we play tested those didn't work. But being able to go back to that first idea quickly and say, oh wait, it actually did work. That's amazing. That is, you want to be able to do that a lot. And you want to be able to do it with your director.
How important is it, do you think, for people who don't have computer programming or Maya expertise to be able to experiment like that, or like be essentially core parts of VR teams, right? Like you have talented people who are working on the team, and others like they're fulfilling a lot of other important roles, but then like have them be able to step into the designer role with a tool like yours. How important is that, do you think, for the success of VR, to essentially have this sort of broader creative bank behind it, and not just sort of like what other mediums had to deal with in their early days, was that the only way you could really do it is if you could speak the programming language? Yeah.
I think it's absolutely crucial, because the amazing VR experiences, whether they're games or movies or social experience or something totally different, is likely not going to come from folks who really know how to do games or film now. You look at the early days of theater, you look at the early days of film, like Orson Welles made, Citizen Kane, and he wasn't an expert in any means. And if he had to learn to be an expert, if cutting film was a really difficult thing you had to spend, a ton of time doing, and if you only could do 10 cuts instead of, thousands, that would totally change how the whole history of film.
Right.
And And the folks who are technical, automatically have a particular way of looking at it that's going to naturally, go to their previous experience. And we'll get people who will learn VR natively, they won't know anything else, but that's, 20 years away. We can't wait that long. So we absolutely need people who don't know what the wrong things to do are. We need to get them in now, and we don't need to train them up and subconsciously bias them towards certain ways of working. We need to get all those ideas into VR now, so we can get those amazing experiences, those counterintuitive experiences out faster and better.
Right.
So yeah, my past history at Pixar and Bungie was all about enabling non-technical people to do technical things. So that's certainly always been the background I've come from. I think with VR we have a chance to take that 10 or 100 times farther, where we can get people who don't even know how to use computers to go and build amazing VR experiences.
Yeah, it's been interesting to hear you speak so passionately about that. I feel like, we see similar sentiments in the game industry, but it feels like it didn't happen quite as quickly. VR is still so new, and the idea that you're already building with a clear eye towards making the content creation experience more approachable is really interesting. I should dig into the chat real quick. Super Kirby 04 says, hello, what's going on? Not much, Kirby. What's up with you?
We're always asking that question. We're talking about VR.
Then,
that's what we're doing.
Yeah. Roman Lux wants to know, Tom, have you looked at a physical acoustic simulation of sounds in VR? It's something they'd like to see.
Yeah, I would love to see that too. We haven't gotten there yet, but something that I'm excited to either take a stab at ourselves or work with some other folks who have deeper and better experience with it. Because I think sound is amazing in VR, and being able to make it more physically based and everything is going to really change not just the quality of it, but what we can do with it on an experience level. I'm waiting for the VR game where you're blind or mostly blind, and you use sound as the main mechanic or the main experience. I think that'd be amazing.
Yeah,
it's only a matter of time, I'm sure. Now I get to ask a question from the chat, which is, Tom, do you think there's something about VR experience development that is inherently more approachable than, say, video game development? Or is it just a question of designing your tool set early to ensure that it is more approachable from the start?
We want to make it more approachable, so we're designing it from the start there. I'm always thinking about, how can we make it easy so that someone who doesn't know anything about anything can go and build something. One of our target customer types is a professional in 2D who has never touched 3D, doesn't know anything about 3D, and is used to drawing. Can we get them to build a VR experience themselves? So I think that is something I'm personally excited about, personally passionate about, because it'll open up VR content creation to so many more people. And I'd rather start that now than to wait till later, especially because people who already know 3D will be happy for it to be faster and easier. No one ever said no to faster and easier content creation.
Yeah.
So that gives us that opportunity, and then it'll increase the power too. The scope of what people can do will let them come up with crazy, amazing ideas that nobody else would have thought of.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you went to the example of a 2D artist, because I was thinking, I was just gonna get your take on whether it's whether the fact that VR is naturally 3D and whether it's more approachable to just anyone because we live our lives in 3D space, right? We inherently understand reaching out, touching things, picking things up and moving them. And that's why I think VR versions of editors like Unity and Unreal are so interesting. But you are immediately going to no, I want somebody who thinks and conceives and expresses themselves through 2D imagery to be able to instantly step into this 3D realm and just make things. That's very interesting.
It's pretty exciting, and we're getting some success already in that area. And I think this is just the beginning, because you're right. People do understand 3D pretty intuitively, and the reason I think that we haven't had more people working in 3D easily is that the tools are really hard to use. But if we're in the world and we need to move a pen by just picking up and moving it, that's what anybody can do. And if you're using that as your starting point, then what else can you do? Once moving the pen's easy, can we animate the pen? Can we put effects on the pen? What else do we want to do with the pen? Can we make it interactive? let's make those things easy, and now the sky becomes the limit.
Yeah.
And then the entertainment's definitely going to be the sphere here. And there's so much left to discover that folks who are indie developers now, or students, or people who want to get into games, have a great opportunity to come into VR and make a mark on the future, because it's super achievable right now. And then I think the folks who know that now can help teach other verticals, other markets, education. Let's teach education how to build an educational VR experience that's actually fun, because we know how to do that. Let's provide them the tools, the expertise, and let's build a really fun VR educational experience that you're going to want to play. And then what's training look like? And you can go on and on. But there's a couple of really near-term areas that could really be really change our idea of what a game is, what a fun experience is, what a social experience is like. And it's that great interplay between games, education, film, theater, and probably a bunch more that I haven't even thought of yet.
When you mentioned reaching out to pick up something, it just got me thinking, like, that's such a natural, intuitive act for so many people. But I mean, there are some people who can't do that, whether for a variety of reasons. It's still such a nascent field that I don't want to put pressure on you to be like, oh well, to dig into accessibility here. But is it something you think about at all as you continue to explore this medium, like how to design virtual reality experiences that maybe don't rely on the use of hands or don't rely on certain senses? Is there ways to convey those emotional experiences with alternate inputs, or is that just sort of, I don't know?
It's a really good question, and that's something we think about, but we don't yet have, because we're a small team, we don't yet have the resources to tackle that specifically. I definitely can see alternate game input schemes where you use just gaze to interact. Or you use a gamepad, because maybe a gamepad's easier than touch controllers for mobility reasons.
And the headsets have microphones, I think, a lot of the time too,
yes,
right? So
they do. So voice is definitely going to be key. And last year, our promo project last year, Gary the Gull used voice as one of the main input mechanisms. That one was an example of how you could go through that story by talking, by nodding or shaking your head, by using hand gestures. So there's multiple ways to do it. The folks who are really taking more of a explicit, we're leaning, because we're small, we're leaning on other people who are already taking the leap here. Like ILM, X Labs, and Ben Peck did a talk at, I believe it was GDC or VRDC, I forget which, last year about accessibility. And I think, and I'm excited with the work that they're doing and the things that they're thinking about. And and other people will join them, I'm sure, and then think about, can we design an experience with multiple ways to engage with it and use that as a way to make it accessible.
Right on.
Roman Looks agrees with you all. They say that, for example, meetings in VR are great compared to video call. You're there in the room with the other person instead of looking at their 2D image on a screen. Man, I just want a meeting app in VR then that just gives you a lot of props you can just like toss around while you talk.
Well, that's what Facebook's doing, right? They have like that. That was that whole thing at Oculus Connect last year.
Yeah.
And honestly, sometimes it's so fun just to fool around with stuff that you get a little distracted. Like, you don't have your phone to distract you, which is great.
Yeah.
But Pluto VR did a lot of work last year about what communication in VR is like, and they had meeting rooms as some of their experiences, and just having a pen and drawing in VR was so much fun that I got distracted in our conversation, and they took out a ball because it was way too much fun. And this is really interesting, right? It's like simple things in VR are so much fun that they get distracting. Like, that's a pretty amazing thing. But then again, on the other hand, my favorite meeting at Pixar involved being in an empty office with 100 super bounce balls on the floor, and a frisbee that you could use to just take a bunch of them and just throw them on the wall and have them bounce everywhere. And meetings in that room was really fun. So maybe I shouldn't discount the value of getting distracted in the meeting. But I think it's going to be really fun to see. Like, I agree. Like, that interaction by seeing that person near you is going to be really, really fun, and give us that opportunity to really expand who we interact with. Like, that's super exciting to me. You don't have to worry about being in the same city or the same room with people and really get like real interaction with them. It would be amazing.
Yeah. I am going to reach back into my VR experience just to ask you about the question of like being able to zoom in or zoom out an object or get really close to an object or get really far away. We talked a second ago about how you can like being close to things in VR is obviously important because like when you're playing on a screen, like if I'm playing Hellblade, technically that character's like only a couple inches tall. Versus in VR, like they can be towering over me. I'm going to quickly reference two things I've seen. One is it was a really amazing tilt brush sculpture where someone like just layers deep, starting from like a snow globe, or like there was a snow globe. You go in, you could pull into inside the snow globe, and there was like a little pond, and you could like he just kept zooming in to pull layers of story out. And then when I was playing Brass Tactics, which is a new VR game. I was playing it at PAX, and like raising and lowering the table to like was essentially their way of letting you zoom in and out of the battlefield. So I could like just zoom in and like for a strategy game like that, it didn't actually give me any advantage, but it did. If anything, being zoomed out just gave me like the broadest room of action with my pointers. How do you like? What's a takeaway you've learned about perspective like that and giving players the ability to like make things up close like that and give it and like that without rendering too much detail, I guess.
Yeah, it's really important for creation for sure, because you just need to get there at the scale that you want, and sometimes you have to come in and come out. You know, in our we play with that in our creative environment by letting you switch between the first person view, which is full scale, you're in the middle of it, and a shrunken down view that we call dollhouse view. So it's shrinks the whole scene to roughly the size of your desk, or bigger or smaller depending on the size of your scene. And that's incredibly powerful and super useful. So I think that's crucial for content creation. The thing I think it's exciting is how do we use that in an experience? Like Brass Tacks or something like Dino Frontier, use that as a way to let you decide how much scale you're comfortable with. How big do you want it to be? It's really a personal preference. I'd be excited to use that as a storytelling or a gameplay mechanic where you're actually, similar to what you're talking about with that quill sculpture, where you're actually zooming in to see the story. I could see that being really, really fun, where zooming in is a part of the experience and it's how you navigate through the experience. That's one of those examples where VR will give you an experience you can't get anywhere else.
We need to wrap this up, but I want to make sure to get a quick question in because I'm always fascinated to talk to speakers as they're about to speak. I want to know first, Tom, is this your first time speaking at GDC and or VRDC or not so much?
No, I've spoken a few times at GDC, and then we spoke on Gary the Gull at VRDC last year, so I'm excited to be back.
So why did you pitch this particular talk?